Greetings, Professor and fellow students. My name is Patrick Dempsey, and I'm going to take over from slide 17 and talk to you briefly about Arctic business opportunities. In this presentation, I'm going to talk to you about why companies would want to do business in the Arctic, what the business environment looks like there now. I'm going to give you a specific case of what it looks like for a particular business in the Arctic right now, and I'm going to talk about future development of business. Okay, so if you go to the next slide in the presentation, basically, why do companies want to do business in the Arctic? Companies want to do business in the Arctic because there's an abundance of resources there. Some of the main resources there are gas and oil, and also minerals and fish. And companies in these industries are they want to take advantage of the abundance of resources. If you look at the statistics on the gas, 30% of the world's undiscovered gas reserves are in the Arctic. So companies are going to try to capitalize that. The important thing to take away from this presentation is that as the ice melts away, basically, businesses are going to have more opportunity to exploit the resources in the Arctic. And then shipping is also an industry that will likely increase in the Arctic due to the environmental changes. As the ice continues to melt, the northern sea passage is going to be open for longer during the year, and this is going to allow shipping companies to ship goods through the Arctic, the North Passages, and that produces huge benefits for business shipping their products and shipping companies alike. It cuts travel time tremendously. So these are kind of the big areas and the resources that businesses are going to try to exploit. If you move on to the next slide, basically in the Arctic right now, everybody wants a piece of the pie due to high commodity prices worldwide and the availability of the resources. Now, from a stakeholder perspective, there's Arctic states, Canada, Russia, U.S., Denmark, Norway are the main states, and there's also Finland, Sweden, and Iceland. And those 8 states make up the members of the Arctic Council, and there's also a group of permanent observers on that council and other stakeholders involved in activities in the Arctic, and these could be environmental organizations, they could be watch groups for business, they could be political foundations and groups representing indigenous people. Currently in the Arctic, there is a little bit of dispute about how to divvy up the territory. International law guarantees the Arctic state, the main Arctic states, 200 nautical miles, an economic zone. And on the other hand, the UN Law of the Sea argues that that economic zone can be extended based on the continental shelf. If the continental shelf extends for a particular company beyond that 200-mile boundary, then, it may be considered their territory. And even though the U.S. doesn't ratify the UN Law C, other companies are trying to exploit that and take advantage of it to get more territory and get their hands on more resources. If you go to the next slide, go in depth a little bit about a company conducting business or trying to conduct business in the Arctic right now, and that would be Shell. Royal Dutch Shell is the formal name. In 2012, Shell was granted permission to drill in 2 areas of the Arctic. And even before the first drill was in the ground, they had to spend $4.5 billion, $4.5 billion to, mitigate the risks associated with Arctic drilling, to appease regulators, and they also had to get 35 permits to operate on an annual basis. So the Shell case so far kind of proves that business can be very difficult in the Arctic, and it's very risky. And in fact, weather, regulatory hurdles, fines, and lawsuits have made Shell stop its operation in 2013, and they question ongoing operations in 2014 in the Arctic. And it just goes to show that conducting business in the Arctic is difficult because there's a variety of stakeholders that want to influence how business functions in the region, and they include the stakeholders we previously talked about, nations, watch groups, societal organizations, groups of indigenous people. They all kind of want to craft policy in the area, and they influence the business regulations for businesses to operate in the area. So it's really important if a business wants to successfully operate to appease other stakeholders. If you go to the next slide, just to talk briefly, the polar bear is a stakeholder in the Arctic as well, but it's kind of a voiceless stakeholder. It's not like these other, these organizations or these political groups that, want to get involved in the Arctic policy and how business is going to move forward. They're kind of almost voiceless, and even though the U.S. considers them a threatened species and gives them an area of land, a habitat that is protected, I would argue that these protections, if business continues to increase in the Arctic, are going to kind of fall short in protecting the species because, as these businesses grow in the Arctic and disturb the habitat more and pollute more, they could seriously impact polar bear populations. So for the next slide, I just want to briefly touch on this. I'm on slide 22 now. Organizations kind of facilitating cooperation. The main organization is the Arctic Council, and this is kind of an intergovernmental forum about coordination and development and appeasement of stakeholders as the Arctic continues to exist and is exploited for business. But two of the major ones I just want to let you know exist are the Arctic Business Roundtable and the Arctic Business Leadership Council. And these two organizations deal specifically with business and communicating, facilitating communication between different industries, different companies, and different nations about how to sustainably do business in the Arctic and how to make sure that everybody is kind of on the same page with what should be preserved in the Arctic and how to conduct business there. So the final slide on slide 23, looking to the future, there's definitely a lot of opportunity for business in the Arctic. And I think that as the ice continues to melt, the business is only going to increase. A big question is, will these businesses be able to work together with all the other stakeholders, to promote sustainable development and promote habitat protection for the wildlife and some of the beautiful species that live there? And I would say if they don't work together with these other stakeholders at the nexus of the business, government, and society kind of discipline, it could become a situation of the tragedy of the commons, where these independent actors are working to get as many resources as they can, and they know when it's if they keep doing that, it'll be depleted, but they kind of continue to do so until it's depleted. So I really think regulation is going to be important moving forward, and international cooperation between businesses and governments. And I also think that corporate social responsibility is really going to be key moving forward to promote ethical business practices in the Arctic. I thank you a lot for your time. I hope you have a nice day.